Hello everyone and welcome to the inaugural launch of the Broken Promises exhibit from the Landscapes of Injustice Research and Public History Project. We are coming to you from inside the museum at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, and we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish and Hunkaminam-Seeking peoples, and in particular, the Squamish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam First Nations, on whose territory we stand. I'm Sherri Kajiwara, the Director-Curator of the Nikkei National Museum and co-curator of the Broken Promises exhibit, and co-hosting with me today is the project lead, Dr. Jordan Stanger-Ross.
I'm really excited, Sherri, to be here launching this exhibit, this beautiful exhibit. I'm Jordan Stanger-Ross, Associate Professor of History at the University of Victoria, and also, as Sherri said, Project Director of Landscapes of Injustice.
So today we have a very special guest to lead us off this morning. Elder Sam George has been a Squamish Nations elder and a former Squamish Nations councillor, and also a retired longshoreman. So we invite Elder Sam George to bless the exhibit. Over to you, Sam.
Choch Mahach. My traditional name is Seattle Toch, and it was given to me by my grandmother and my grandfather. I come from the Squamish Nation, and once again, I'm very privileged and honored to be asked to come here and do a welcoming and a prayer song. And I was just reading all the things that are around me here, and I can relate to some of it. Being taken away at an early age and put into a residential school for 8 years. I know it wasn't quite as, I can't compare it to what happened to a people, a race. But I am honored to be here, and I'm going to say a welcoming, and I'm going to say a prayer to Creator to come down and bless this building, the people who are in it, and the people who work here and who visit here. Oh, Creator, we ask you to come down and take care of each and every one of us. Thank you for getting each and every one of us here safely. And when we go home to our teepees, to our dwellings, take care of us. Grant us safe journeys. Watch over us, Creator. And once again, special blessings on this room here, this place of remembrance that carries a lot of power and strength. Whatever happened to us made us stronger, because we're still here and we're going to be here for a long time. Watch over each and every one of us today, Creator. This song comes from a man I call Grandpa. I had the honor of calling Grandpa. His name, he was a well-known man. He was called Chief Dan George, and he sang this song many moons ago. And I had the honor of being present. He sang it at the Empire Stadium, and I think it was some Canadian celebration. Anyway. Oh, ho, hey, oh, ee, oh, ee, oh, ho, hey, oh, hey, oh, 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 hey, oh, oh, hey, oh, hey. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Elder Sam George has been blessing our events at the Nikkei National Museum for many, many years now, and each time it just feels so magical. So next we have a special greeting from the Executive Director of the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center. Karah Goshinmon Foster joins us live this morning. Handing it over to Karah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Karasawa Gallery in the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center. Through extensive partnerships and collaboration, we first opened our doors on September 22nd of the year 2000 with the inaugural exhibition, Reshaping Memory, Owning History, through the lens of Japanese-Canadian redress. Now, 20 years later, we are so pleased to host the opening of the Broken Promises exhibit. This following a 7-year partnership with the Landscapes of Injustice Research Project, co-curated with the Royal BC Museum, really building on that history of collaboration and partnerships to create diverse works. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to everyone here, to the entire project, to the team, to all of its partners, and of course to the families for sharing their diverse stories and personal histories, and for uncovering the historical records for the community and for the broader society as a whole. Thank you so much for your dedication and for your resilience. We look forward to welcoming visitors into the gallery safely and carefully when the time is right. And although challenging at this time, a bright future awaits. And the stories and records will live on and continue to inform Canadians from now and into the future. Thank you.
I think you call yourselves a small but mighty organization or something like that. It is a wonderful host organization for so much of the work that we've done. I just feel blessed to have gotten the chance to work with the Nikkei National Museum. And you might remember that early in the project, this was a small initiative with a small museum and some researchers, and then the entrance of the Royal BC Museum into the project and the commitment of a major cultural institution in the province to tell a new and diverse, more diverse history of the province really transformed what this project could be. And so it's with real gratitude that I introduced the CEO of that museum to say a few words, Professor Jack Lohman.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Hajimemashite. Fukusoryoji Masayo Tado-san, Shichohale, Monsieur le Ministre de la Patrimoine canadien, Elder Sam George, Hukumun to Squamish, Hanasitu Hito, Sherri, Minasan Konnichiwa. Watashi wa Jack desu. Watashi wa Igirisu no Columbia Hatsubutsukan no Kancho desu. Dozo yoroshiku ka. Kodomo no toki, sobo ga Nihon no ehon o watashi no kuremashita. Ichiban suki na hon deshita. Gakko de Nihon no imin no rekishi to bunka o manabimashita. But I didn't really learn about Japanese Canadian history until I came here. As a major partner in Landscapes of Injustice since its inception in 2014, the Royal British Columbia Museum has provided financial and staffing support throughout the life of the project. I wish to note in particular the extraordinary access granted to project researchers who were embedded in the British Columbia archives for 4 years. They uncovered materials that testify anew to the structural and enduring racism experienced by Japanese Canadians during the internment era. Broken Promises reminds us that social justice takes many forms, and that now, more than ever, museums like the Royal BC Museum share in the responsibility to amplify the voices of marginalized communities, past, present, and future. I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this extraordinary project and wish you great success in engaging with the whole of Canada as the host of this thoughtful and research-driven exhibition. Domo arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you so much, Jack. 本当にどうもありがとうございました。We were unable to have the entire exhibit team here with us today at this table. So we had a video created to capture some of their voices and let you see a little bit behind the curtain, and also the voices of the descendants of a couple of the main storytellers who are in the Broken Promises exhibit. So let's watch that video now.
So the museum exhibit is structured as a straightforward chronology, but we've really endeavored to tell the story of the dispossession of Japanese Canadians through first-person narratives as much as possible.
In the beginning, we introduced 7 narrators, and it really sets the stage for telling a very complicated story through individual stories. It places the visitor right there with the people who lived it.
My connection to the Kajiwara family is that I'm Masue and Rinkichi's grandson. I'd like to share something that is quite meaningful to me. It's an invoice pad from the war. And the date on it is 1904, and then there's a blank on the pad. And there were hundreds of these made, and of course he thought he was going to be using these, and he was quite successful, so he got a lot of them made to be used for his company. And unfortunately he wasn't able to use them because of all that happened, the hardship that took place. So I used these pads in the early 80s at university doing calculus on the back of the pads because there was space to do them. So every time I kind of used them, I thought about how hard he worked. And that got me to work even harder.
When you move into the decade of administration, you'll encounter a series of case files that we've curated with the Ategi family. There's a really striking letter where they've included a map to a secret compartment that would have contained family heirlooms, and the letters to the administrators come with this very detailed map asking to please retrieve these artisanal tools. Ultimately, the letter that the Ategi family receives is that their home and boatworks had been looted. There was a promise to protect that had really been let down.
When I look at that picture of the Ategi boatworks on Dyke Road, it reminds me of my childhood because I spent a lot of time there. I kind of knew about what had happened. I knew there was another, my grandfather's boatworks, and it was gone during the war, but not so much about the depth of hardship the family went through. They didn't really talk about that.
My hope is that visitors take away from this exhibit a greater appreciation of the need to listen. Because if you haven't experienced racism yourself, listening is the first step to taking action.
What I like people to take away is that freedom is very valuable, individual rights are valuable, and that discrimination for any reason is wrong.
I hope that visitors get a sense of the resilience of the community, and that that resilience continues into the present.
One thing that I'm really proud of in the museum exhibit is the diversity of stories. Japanese Canadians dealing with the legacy of loss and facing a difficult history, but also the descendants of the bureaucrats and neighbors of Japanese Canadians who have also lived with this story.
What I hope others would learn about the exhibit and Masue's story is that it's just one story out of thousands of stories, and not just about Japanese Canadians, but about other injustices that have taken place in the world.
So my favorite feature of the Broken Promises exhibition is the end. It's the section where we ask the question of visitors, can Canada be a just home for all?
Because the exhibit is introduced through 7 narrators, 7 storytellers, and you can follow them through the exhibit, you can find this thread of continuity through even the most complex or most dense parts of the exhibit. And I'm hoping that visitors will feel that they're really walking alongside these storytellers as they go through.
It was about 10 years ago, I guess, Sherri, that I first walked into this beautiful museum. And I came in with some specific questions about research I was conducting on an individual Japanese Canadian named Kishizo Kimura. And Kimura had participated in the dispossession of Japanese Canadians. In 1942, as we just heard, a promise was made to Japanese Canadians when they were uprooted and interned. A promise that their property would be held and protected in their interests for the duration of the war or their internment, and returned to them as soon as that was possible. And in the weeks and months that followed, neighbors looted and stole from Japanese Canadians' homes, and officials did nothing about it. And then in 1943, the federal government decided to forcibly sell all of the property of Japanese Canadians. And officials called Kimura and asked him to participate on a committee to oversee those sales. So I came to this museum with questions about Kimura and why he had done what he had done, what it was like to live through that era of racism and the different responses that Japanese Canadians made. Well, when I got here, I met the remarkable archivist and researcher, the very enthusiastic and knowledgeable Linda Kuomoto-Reed. And I had never met an archivist like Linda before. She brought me what I asked for, but she also brought me other materials that I didn't know about and hadn't asked for. She gently nudged my research toward a wider perspective on the many responses that Japanese Canadians had to the internment era. And she conveyed to me, most of all, her own individual enthusiasm, but also the passion at this museum and across the whole staff here for the history as well as the concerns of the wider Japanese Canadian community to understand the dispossession more deeply than they previously had done. And that discussion with Linda was the first of many partnership building discussions with other archivists and librarians, with scholars, with students, that eventually generated an application to the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada for a large grant to undertake this project. And we got the funds. So we were able to undertake 4 years of intensive research. And then the last 3 years, since 2018, we've been building different ways of conveying this story. Now, of course, we're launching today the museum exhibit, Broken Promises, which conveys that research. But we'll also be sharing the other fruits of the partnership, teacher resources and the digital archives that we've created, really a rich array of materials. And we hope that you'll find them as inspiring as we have. Our work has been motivated by a set of shared convictions, a conviction that in doing this research and sharing it as widely as we can, sharing that information with Japanese Canadians and a wider Canadian public, that we offer some measure of justice or at least information to the Japanese Canadian families that lived through the dispossession. Another conviction, I think, is that by doing this work, we hold somewhat to account the government that undertook these actions and the public that allowed that to occur. And I think we share the conviction, Sherri, that by doing this work together, we hope to build a more just Canadian future.
So, the exhibit was, in a great part, made possible because of funding from Canadian Heritage. And we have a wonderful message from the Minister, Stephen Guilbeault, and that will be followed by greetings from Mayor Hurley of Burnaby and MLA for Burnaby Deer Lake and Kang.
Hello, bonjour. Congratulations to the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center on the opening of the Broken Promises exhibit. This travel and exhibit complements 7 years of community engagement and academic research involving multiple universities across Canada. It is a monumental achievement and an important historical record for all Canadians. Most importantly, this exhibit tells a story that we must ensure is never forgotten, to be certain that we never again lose sight of the irreparable harms done by racism, mistrust, and fear. Pendant la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, le gouvernement du Canada a délogé, interné et dépossédé plus de 22 000 Nippons canadiens des régions côtières de la Colombie-Britannique. These acts changed the Japanese Canadian community forever. That history still matters today. It resonates in the stories of those who lived through these injustices and in the individuals and communities who continue to live with their impacts. Le gouvernement du Canada est heureux d'appuyer Promesses brisées, une exposition qui met ce passé difficile en lumière, nous incite à y réfléchir et à cheminer vers la guérison. As Broken Promises exhibit travels to museums across Canada, I invite all Canadians to experience this chapter of our history through a new lens, to learn more about life for Japanese Canadians before, during, and after the war, and about how the legacies of dispossession continue to this day. Armed with that knowledge and understanding, we can, I hope, work together to build better landscapes for Canada's future. Thank you. Merci.
Hello, I'm Mike Hurley, Mayor of Burnaby. Broken Promises sheds light on a painful time in our history when Japanese Canadians lost their homes, their possessions, and their rights. Through this exhibit, we recognize their losses and we honor their struggle for justice. On behalf of Council, thank you to the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center and your partners for curating this important exhibit. We also applaud you as you celebrate 20 years of sharing Japanese Canadian heritage and history right here in Burnaby. To the viewers of this exhibit and to the entire community. We hope you will continue to stay well.
Hi everyone, konnichiwa. I'm Ann Kang, MLA for Burnaby Deer Lake and Minister of Citizen Services and Minister responsible for multiculturalism. I want to congratulate the hardworking team at the Nikkei Museum for the launch of their Broken Promises exhibit. Thank you all for making this event accessible to everyone in the comfort and safety of their homes. We may be seeing fewer faces in person, but we can still come together to learn from storytellers and reflect on Canada's imperfect past. Moreover, thank you for your continued efforts over the years to honor, preserve, and share Japanese culture here in Burnaby and British Columbia. We are so blessed to know you as friends and neighbors. Congratulations again, everyone, and I can't wait to view the exhibit for myself.
Next, it is my great honor to introduce a dedicated member of the Community Council that is connected to the Landscapes of Injustice project. Vivian Wakabashi Rygnestad has led the Community Council actually even before my time. I inherited my role from Beth Carter, who was the original applicant with Jordan on the grant and the museum director curator before me, and she is currently the head curator at the Bill Reid Gallery. Vivian has been not only leading the Community Council, but has been an advisor on the exhibit development together with Mary Kitagawa, another dedicated Community Council member. And the Broken Promises exhibit would not be the same without these two amazing advisors. But no one tells Vivian's story as well as she does. So I'm going to stop talking and let Vivian take over.
Thank you, Sherri. The Community Council was established by the Landscapes of Injustice project to act in an advisory role to its researchers. Our 9 members were Japanese Canadians chosen from across Canada. As a group, and often with the researchers, we had many discussions on topics such as terminology, ethics, the gathering, storage, and use of oral histories, and euphemisms. We knew stories from our own experiences and from our families, but this was our opportunity to learn from and have stories confirmed by government records, letters, oral histories, and other items uncovered by the research. Thank you to the Landscapes of Injustice project for the opportunity to represent the Japanese Canadian community in this study of racism, forced uprooting, internment, dispossession that completely changed the lives of thousands of Japanese Canadians of Japanese heritage. Thank you to Jordan Stanger-Ross for his vision and commitment to the study of Japanese Canadian dispossession. The results of the project include a narrative website, digital archives database, teacher resources, the museum exhibit, the Landscapes of Injustice book, but equally important are the many researchers and students and community members who are now trying to gather more and more information and furthering their studies and careers in the areas of history and social justice. This is not just Japanese Canadian history, this is Canadian history. As the chair of the Community Council, I thank Community Council members Art Miki, Sally Ito, Jennifer Hashimoto, Norm Ibuki, Marian Tosh Kitagawa, Eiko Ibi, and Suzanne Tabata. Thank you to all the Community Council members for their commitment to ensuring that the voices of Japanese Canadians were always an integral part of the project. On a personal level, I was not only learning about Japanese Canadian history in general, it was causing me to reflect deeply on the lives of my parents and my grandparents. I was born during the internment era, and over the years, my parents guided, encouraged, and supported me. But they didn't talk much about their internment years, and I didn't know enough to ask. One day, during the research, I received an email from Eric Adams and Jordan Stanger-Ross, a draft of a paper they were writing, and they asked my opinion. In the second sentence, I read, Tadao Wakabayashi. I immediately emailed back with, that's my father's name. Is there someone else with the same name? Immediately I got the answer back. Yes, it was my father. He didn't tell us. I didn't know that in 1944, my father, along with Mr. Nakashima, Mr. Tanaka, and their lawyer, J. Arthur McLennan, went to Ottawa to protest the government's broken promise that led to the sale of everything left behind, left in trust by 22,000 Japanese Canadians. I was proud of my father for being one of the men chosen to confront the Prime Minister about the broken promise. This caused me to begin reflecting more deeply and to appreciate even more the sacrifices, hard work, resilience, courage, and positive attitudes and actions of my parents. With them as role models, I absorbed the values of family, service, leadership, education, kindness, and compassion. I learned about social justice and the importance of taking a stand. There are many ways of taking a stand. I learned more when I received files from my family from the Digital Archives database. Reading through the government files revealed the official losses of home, businesses, vehicles, and household items that had been left behind, then taken and sold. There are times when I find myself thinking, I wish I had talked more with my parents. I wish they were still here so I could ask them. It's easy to blame our parents for not telling us, for not talking about their experiences around internment. There are so many reasons for the silence. Silence. Guilt, shame, anger. Shikataganai. We can change the silence around the racism, the social injustices, the internment by Canada of its own citizens. We can change the silence. We need to start by educating ourselves and others about this dark part of Canadian history. And we can begin by telling our own family stories to our own children. Thank you. And now here's a short video about the Digital Archives database and stories from some of our community members about accessing their family files and the stories they learned. Thank you.
This is a publicly accessible database. It's a staggering amount of information that we are putting together in one cohesive place for access to the public. It's a lot of material to harmonize into one cohesive unit and make it easily searchable, which we've done with a static search capabilities.
Oftentimes it's very difficult to do family research, and these records will provide some insight for individuals who are doing research on their family history, and particularly on the forced dispossession and dispersal of the community during the Second World War and after. We've designed the database to be searchable from a library or archival perspective, but you can also use it as like a Google searchable, enter your keywords. So for individuals who are interested in exploring family history, they can type in their last name, and what will culminate are all the results that we've gathered over the years that highlight individuals that were incorporated within the government records.
I was able to look up my grandparents, my great-grandparents on both sides of my adopted family. You would think it would just be a dry read, but it's very emotional.
It was quite a personal journey to read the file. It was over 500 pages in the file, and I basically discovered that well, not only was my grandfather a really smart guy, I understood how he valued himself and how he valued what he had built in this country. So what I wish for other Japanese Canadian descendants of internees is to keep an open mind and an open heart. Reading the files on your family members can be a very moving experience, and it is a process of discovery of self.
The sheer scale of the archives available for this project ended up staggering us, and the work you can see from that video, the power of those case files that Library and Archives Canada made available for us, and we're very proud of that opportunity to make those files available. Those will all be available publicly in January of 2021, and we'll do more announcements at that time to make those available. All of those archival materials also provided a foundation for research, and we spent 4 years collecting materials, analyzing materials, writing publications, and talking with one another about what we had found. And eventually, we started to ask, well, what does it all amount to? What do these research materials contribute to together? How have we changed what we already knew? And there was already considerable scholarship on the internment of Japanese Canadians. And so being historians, a number of us, we did what historians do and wrote a long book with many footnotes in answer to that question. And I hope it's also an engaging book. I want to tell a few stories that convey the major parts of that book that also provide a foundation for the interpretive plan of this exhibit and other resources from the project. Our book's divided into 4 major claims, each of which comprises a part of the book. The first part of the book describes the killing of home. And the killing of home that occurred through dispossession comes across through many resources, but the one that spoke to me, I guess, particularly, were the letters that Japanese Canadians wrote when they found out that their homes and businesses and farms were being forcibly sold without their approval. And one in particular by a farmer from Haney, British Columbia, a man named Rikizo Yonoyama, described the role that the farm that he had built over several decades played in his family's past and also the future that he anticipated. And Yonoyama wrote that he could understand, or he could live with at least, the temporary uprooting of his family, but that the sale of his farm was something that he couldn't comprehend. The dispossession involved the killing of those homes. The second part of our book addresses the sustained work of the dispossession. A wonderful chapter by a former student of mine, Ariel Merriam, describes the Nagata family from Vancouver and their efforts to negotiate with lower-level bureaucrats of the custodian of enemy property that held their funds and would release them intermittently, and the Nagatas needed those funds. So they'd write letters and even send gifts to a low-level bureaucrat by the name of Frederick Field, who would decide, made many decisions as to whether to release additional funds for them to purchase winter coats, for example, during a winter in Alberta. The dispossession unfolded in these many decisions on the part of many people, not one panicked moment at the start of war, but rather the sustained work of administering people's lives for almost a decade of time. And the Nagatas had to work too. They had to work with that state that was controlling so much of their opportunity and their lives. The third part of our book is about the reasons that people offer for these kinds of actions and the reasons that Japanese Canadians use to try and fight against them. As Vivian's already mentioned, her father was involved in a case that went to a federal court challenging the dispossession, challenging its legality. And there at that court, Japanese Canadians presented their arguments against, and the government defended, ultimately successfully, the dispossession as legal. To understand why injustice like this occurs, we have to understand the reasons that people gave for doing what they did, and the reasons that were marshaled against them. The last part of our book conveys the permanence of dispossession. The internment was too long, but it ended. But the dispossession and its effects lingered on, and the permanence of the dispossession is conveyed in many sources, many of which are conveyed in this exhibit as well, including in oral histories. I felt the permanence of dispossession very tangibly one day in Victoria towards the end of the research phase of this project, when I was at a friend's house who had a box of fine china from a Japanese-Canadian family that had been entrusted to her grandparents when their neighbors were uprooted and interned. And so there I was in this kitchen holding in my hand cups and saucers and plates that were there because of the dispossession. I was holding the dispossession in my hands. And I of course thought of that Japanese-Canadian family that was missing that heirloom. The dispossession didn't end in '49 with the last of the internment laws, but rather its effects linger on to today. The Landscapes of Injustice book, like the rest of the work that we've done, is collective work. And so we'll now see a short video that introduces some of the authors of chapters in that book. You'll have to hear a short introduction from me, but then you'll see other faces, other contributors to that collective work. This new book, Landscapes of Injustice, is really the result of years of research to understand the dispossession of Japanese Canadians. The book is organized around 4 major claims that the research project makes. And those claims really center on the loss of home, that Japanese Canadians were not temporarily uprooted and interned, although they were, but in addition to that, they permanently lost their homes.
So I contributed a piece entitled A Wealth Over Home, and it is a study that examines what happened to a family. They ran a family store together, a family business that catered to community members, selling all kinds of goods, from customized clothing to food items, some key ingredients in Japanese cooking.
So one chapter that I worked on in the Landscapes of Injustice book was drawn from the oral histories of Japanese Canadians, and I wrote that with Dr. Jordan Stanger-Ross and Dr. Heather Reed. It includes stories from over 80 Japanese Canadians.
I was involved in writing a chapter called My Land is Worth $1 Million. This was a chapter which took an archive of letters, about 300 letters written by owners who now for the first time discover that in fact the government has not held their property in trust but has sold them against their will.
The material assets of the family, including the home, the cars, and also their business, were destroyed.
It's a story in which people and their relationships to things that they value are devalued.
This is a story that's fundamentally a story of people. It's a story of resilience.
We inherit landscapes that have been transformed by acts of past injustice.
I certainly hope that this book would inspire people to stand up against social injustice.
So by now, I'm sure you're getting a sense of the multiple layers that make up the 7-year project that is Landscapes of Injustice. So in addition to the exhibit development team and the digital archive team, there is an amazing team working for developing teacher resources to mobilize knowledge to elementary and secondary school audiences. And to tell us more about that today are Governor General Award-winning teacher Greg Miyanaga and District Administrator Mike Perry-Whittingham.
Thank you, Sherri, and congratulations on this opening of this new and exciting exhibit, Broken Promises. 7 years ago, our friend and mentor, Mas Fukawa, asked Mike and me to be involved in this new project called Landscapes of Injustice. We really had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. The Landscapes of Injustice project has been a unique opportunity for my elementary co-author, Lindsay Hill, and myself, because we were able to work with this incredible network of brilliant people. Historians and museum people like Jordan, Caitlin Finley, and Sherri helped us find important information and key artifacts. And the stories and the personal accounts from Japanese Canadians like Vivian, Art Miki, and Mary Kitagawa not only give us insights into history, but remind us about the purpose of this project. So how do you teach 10-year-olds about internment and dispossession? Well, here's a video explaining about what the elementary program looks like. So the way the Landscapes of Injustice teaching materials are structured for elementary is that there is the main dispossession activity, which is a Powell Street simulation. But then there's these 8 concurrent supporting lessons, and they include things like what's their idea of fair, how important is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what was it like to live in internment, what kinds of things would you bring, and also to look at things like how do you make an apology for making such a big mistake, and how should you treat people. We have the students create an immigrant neighborhood using this bulletin board to go through the process of dispossession.
As an educator, I encourage teachers who use the resource to allow ample time for students to create their buildings, their avatars, and their possessions. As the more time and effort they invest in their work, the more they'll be able to grasp the concepts of loss and injustice for Japanese Canadians later on in the unit.
The most appropriate age group for the internment and disposition lessons is about grade 5. That's when the students, I feel, can handle the heaviness and the importance of the issue. It's quite complicated. Anything younger than, say, grade 4, and they start to get really worried about the state of the world. And anything older, they're already building the sense of fair. And this kind of helps them solidify what their idea of fair is in a just society, like a Canadian society.
Once they've invested that time and effort, they're proud of their work, they become very interested in that idea of community and the interactions between the avatars on their Powell Street simulation. When it does come to internment and dispossession, the students react quite strongly, which is exactly what we want to bring out in them, that idea of connection and a sense of loss that maybe gives them a better understanding of what that might have been like for Japanese Canadians.
It is very important for students to learn this because it's the first time they get to deal with a real Canadian issue that was very important and shows how important being treated fairly and equally is to all citizens of Canada.
It is a great springboard into human rights and social justice. So it allows students an opportunity to connect the past to what is going on in the world. And it is amazing to see as a teacher the connections the kids find with past events and what they see in their world today. And it really does get them asking questions and considering their own beliefs and values and bias, which is so essential for all citizens.
We field tested the elementary lessons in over 40 classrooms in BC, but also in Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. We've had great success and will continue to spread these lessons across Canada through our upcoming website and through our summer field school. The pilot classes gave us very positive feedback. Teachers really liked the richness of the materials and the topic, and the students found the simulations and the lessons engaging. And they really got emotionally involved through the history, through the simulations and the supporting lessons. Coming up next is a powerful example of some of the success we've had with the elementary lessons. The videos you see will be from Milana-Ross in Ontario, who had some of our students read the protest letters written from the point of view of dispossessed Japanese Canadians. And after the video, Mike Perry-Whittingham will come on to talk to you about the secondary school resource.
January 16th, 1947. Dear Government,
Greetings, my name is Hisa Aikida, and I am a 31-year-old married and pregnant Japanese-Canadian woman.
Dear government, greetings. My name is Tamuro Akido. I am a Japanese-Canadian citizen who has been affected by your decision to intern all Japanese.
Dear government, my name is Isuaki Fujiwara. I am 18 years old and I am a Japanese-Canadian who used to live on 379 Powell Street.
Greetings, my name is Mukai Otomatsu. I am 40 years old. I fish and I have a wife and 2 kids. I work at the local fish market on Powell Street.
My family has been living in Vancouver, BC for our whole lives. I'm a parent to 2 and a wife. I do not appreciate the way that the Japanese are being treated. I am concerned about your decision to intern all Japanese, Canadian or not.
I think our internment is very unfair because we are all Canadians and we all deserve to be treated equally no matter what race we are.
Those who are not Japanese don't get sent away. It's not fair.
I think that we shouldn't be sent to these internment camps because of our background. I believe that we should be able to stay at our homes and live our normal life.
I own a boat, a house, fishing gear, a car, and a fish market.
My husband and I own a sewing machine store on Powell Street. I'm a professional sewer and tailor. We sell sewing machines that are sold in Japan. We also own fabrics made in Japan. These fabrics are very rare and hard to find. I have worked on my collection of these rare fabrics for my entire lifetime. These fabrics are part of my heritage, and because I live in Canada, which is my home, you still have no right to take these away from me.
We could only bring a certain amount of things, and I had things that I couldn't bring that were important to me, like a dress that was my grandmother's when she was young, and she gave it to me before she passed away.
I recently received a notice saying that my property is on sale and I have gotten $155 for all of my possessions, which have been auctioned off. I am not an idiot. Of course I did not get a fair amount of money.
That you had promised me and every other Japanese Canadian that we would have our properties untouched, but now they are being sold? You did not keep your promise to us.
Even so, the possessions I have bought and the property I own cannot be sold and taken away forever. Now my family has nothing to come back to. My children will never grow up in the house they were born. They will never play with the beautiful Japanese dolls that I once played with.
You promised our properties would be untouched. That means you have broken that promise. When you will release us from the internment camp, if that ever happens, we will have no home to go back to.
I hope that you understand that the things that have happened to all the Japanese Canadians is your fault, and we didn't deserve any of it.
In the past, I thought about Canada. I never imagined that something so horrid as this would ever occur in my home, Canada.
Will you ever regret your decision to intern Japanese Canadians? I certainly hope so. You have ruined the lives of many Japanese Canadians. We do not deserve this punishment.
I remember when I was younger, every morning before school started, we would sing the national anthem. I recall how I would proudly sing the first line. It was a line that always stuck with me. Oh, Canada, our home and native land. But now I'm not sure if I can call it that any longer.
From Mukai Otomatsu.
Hisa Aikida.
Really, Isuaki Fujiwara.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time out today to share this afternoon with us. Let me start by expressing my sincere gratitude to Mas Fukao, who brought me on this project 7 years ago, to Jordan for his immense leadership throughout the process and his support in particular of teacher resources, and of course the Japanese Canadian community who have embraced us from the very start in trying to create these lessons for teachers. Let me also give a shout out to my teaching colleagues, my co-authors, Patrick Anderson, Jonathan Balin, and Caitlin Finley. Without, we could not have the resources that you will be able to access for your students soon. We need only consider the news and the current climate that we visit every day to understand the importance of these lessons and these materials being brought to kids across Canada, and I hope you'll embrace them. The lessons were based on the multidisciplinary research done by Landscapes of Injustice and the amazing new resources, archival sources, oral testimony, images, and government documents that we've been able to bring into our lessons and offered you to use for our students. These new resources haven't been seen in Canadian classrooms before, and I think will highlight the importance of this history. Our materials have been built to be both thematic and chronological in nature, and to challenge students to thinking critically about this history and looking at it from today's lens. But perhaps the most important part that I see as a contribution of these lessons is the powerful stories that we can now tell of families, Japanese Canadian families that suffered loss, but also persevered and were resilient through our letters of protest and our postcard activity that you'll see in our resource. I look forward to having my teaching colleagues embrace this new material to make use of our website, particularly as we now experience much more online learning from our students as well as in our classrooms. And I encourage you to seek out our resources and to contact Landscapes of Injustice when you're ready to consider piloting our materials or have questions about the resources we've prepared for you. At this time, I'd like to share with you a short video on our teacher resources. Thank you for taking your time. So why teach about the Japanese-Canadian dispossession? Well, I mean, I think I would flip it and say we're talking about Canadian history. These are issues of injustice. These are issues of how we treated Canadian citizens during a time of war. One of the aspects of the project was to create teachable resources for public schools for use Canada-wide. It works in essentially a chronological fashion, but has thematic elements. So there's 4 broad lessons. One is immigration and settlement. The second is the internment area. The third focuses specifically on dispossession. And then the fourth is on the legacies of dispossession. And within each of these lessons, there are a variety of activities using the source materials. The web-based piece is significant. It's going to expand the scope of the resources. It's going to expand the reach of the resources. We won't have only primary source materials, which are archival, photo images, and documents, but there's also going to be oral clips, video clips, which students and teachers will be able to use.
This is the place, the entry point for many people will be in high school, learning about it and hopefully engaging with it and being inspired to find out more and do more as a result of what they've learned.
I had the opportunity to work with Mike Perry-Whittingham on the development of the teacher resources for the high school level. I could imagine myself as a high school student just being so interested in being able to get my hands on these primary sources. And Mike has designed exercises that challenge students to think about that policy-making process and in a way put themselves in those shoes.
My biggest concern with the dispossession piece was trying to get kids to emotionally connect to this loss and how that's played out right into the present time. And the letters of protest, which is another activity we have, will certainly do some of that.
Primary sources were always the most interesting aspects of history. I wanted to hear directly the voices of people. And so going back and seeing the words of some of the people involved and hearing them speak. This project, I think, gets to the heart of both what teaching history is all about and also what being Canadian is all about.
By telling these stories, we present, I think, a more forthright and honest story about Canada's past. We can then bring that story forward and say, these things still are occurring here. They are a legacy of this past. What are the steps we should be taking to take this further?
Mike and Greg and our teachers, eh? What a group to have worked with. Just fantastic. And I'm so excited for the teachers I've met who have started to implement these resources as well. So we've met some of the folks involved in this project, and they're terrific people. But sometimes we have needed advice, and sometimes we've needed support. And we've gotten great advice and support from Rosemary Omer, the chair of our advisory board, and the whole advisory board, and Vivian, who you met, the chair of our community council, as well as the rest of the community council. And I felt really blessed in this project to be very well supported, both in resources and in timely advice by the University of Victoria, and particularly the Offices of Research and the Faculty of Humanities and the History Department, and the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives, where our project is housed. And so it's with gratitude again, sincere gratitude, that I introduced this video of Cynthia Milton, the Associate Vice President of Research at the University of Victoria, who will convey her passion for this project as well.
I'm Cynthia Milton, the Associate Vice President of Research at the University of Victoria. Broken Promises illustrates the regenerative, restorative, and inclusive potential of community-engaged research. Through the curation of experience and memories of untold and untended stories of over 22,000 Japanese Canadians dispossessed by internment policies of 8 decades ago, this exhibition is an effort at recognizing and facing historical wrongs. Dispossession, the loss of possessions, livelihoods, civil, political, economic, social, and human rights happens incrementally at first, and then suddenly is the loss of protection. It happens when communities and individuals are placed in the position of other, and the majority remains silent. This exhibition collapses difference and distance, thus allowing us to reach, although impartially and in part only, a shared understanding. A lesson we need to remember in our world today. As the collaborative participant curators of Broken Promises National Exhibition show, to curate this past is to care for it, to place it, to order it, to not abandon it. We have a shared responsibility to this past, to these stories that we inherit, to protect and nurture them, and to prevent the ossification of these truths, and to continually reactivate their ethical potential.
The Broken Promises exhibit was truly a team effort, and the core exhibit development team was co-led with me by Leah Best, Head of Knowledge of the Royal British Columbia Museum, and our team included Yasmin Amaratungo-Railton, Curatorial Postdoc Fellow, and grad and PhD research assistants, Caitlin Finley, Trevor Weidman, and Eiji Okawa. And as we mentioned earlier, our community council advisors were Vivian and Mary. And of course, none of this would have been possible without my co-host, Jordan. Our fantastic exhibit designer, Doug Monday, and his team coordinated our fabricators, printers, and AV professionals, and they've really done an amazing job.
Amazing.
The full traveling exhibit, the full-scale exhibit, is what you're seeing in the backdrop today, but we are also developing a condensed version that will be suitable for smaller spaces, and that should be available later this year. We did have to pivot, thanks to the pandemic, from a printed exhibit catalog to a digital version, but that is available today. You can go to our museum exhibits page and download either an EPUB or a PDF. And for all of the teachers or homeschoolers at this time, there will be a virtual education kit connected specifically to this exhibit available soon. There were a lot of us working on this exhibit and on all aspects of the exhibit, but I think each of us has kind of a favorite spot. And for me, it's the entrance, the introduction to 7 narrators, 7 storytellers who really carry us through the flow of the entire exhibit. It talks about life before forced dispersal and dispossession, and we meet Eikichi Kagetsu, Kaoru Atagi, Tsuma Tonomura, Teiji Morishita, Keiko Murakami, who is our own Mary Kitagawa, Hiroshi Okuda, and Masue Tagashira. In the first 4 years of the Landscapes of Injustice project, the Nikkei National Museum was the research hub for community records and directories. The project gave us professional Japanese language academic assistance that allowed us to access the early interviews and records of the first immigrant generation from Japan, which had been previously inaccessible because of the language barrier. It's not enough to just be conversant in Japanese or even fluent in contemporary Japanese. You have to be able to read and interpret pre-1942 cursive Japanese, and that is more of an art than a science. So we were very, very lucky to be able to unpack and unearth a lot of that information. And then through analysis of the team, we were able to distill it down from thousands of stories to the 7 storytellers that we've chosen. So that's my favorite bit. Leah Best could not be with us today in person, but we hope she's watching online. And she did send a video that tells about her favorite part. So let's give that video a lesson now.
My hope is that visitors take away from this exhibit a greater appreciation of the need to listen. And I mean that in the sense of, if you have not personally experienced racism in your life, now is the time to listen. Listen to the voices of the narrators in the exhibition, and they're throughout the exhibit. Listen to the voices of the state that are covered off in this exhibition. Listen to the bystanders. Because if you haven't experienced racism yourself, listening is the first step to taking action, and action is the result that I personally would hope that visitors take away from visiting this exhibition.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Amartunga-Railton, the Curatorial Postdoctoral Fellow on Broken Promises. I'm thrilled to share my favorite part of the exhibit today. At the end of the exhibit, we wanted to offer an opportunity to pause and reflect on the legacies of dispossession. These are losses of community, language, identity, but also of resilience, education, and activism. I'm particularly proud of the inclusion of artworks by Emma Nishimura, which for me really encapsulate the concept of intergenerational legacies so poignantly. Emma Nishimura was born in 1982. For her, she had no living memory of the dispossession. These artworks are a reflection of history and memories that are passed down across generations. The artworks that are behind me stem from Emma's work on discovering boxes of her grandmother's sewing patterns, along with lists of the names of individuals from Slocan, which was the internment camp that her grandmother, along with hundreds of other Japanese Canadians, were interned. These patterns represent an act of making and creation in spite of profound losses that she endured. In these works, Emma has laid over her own etchings over top her grandmother's sewing patterns as if they're in conversation with each other. Emma discovering her family's history offers us a really meaningful example of how we can respond to learning this history. These artworks now form part of the Legacy section of the exhibit, and you can hear Emma's own oral history in the Legacy's theater. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to have been able to work with Landscapes of Injustice researchers, as well as the families of our exhibit, and I hope that we've done their stories justice in telling them in a respectful and honest way. Thank you so much.
thank you so much for joining us today for this unusual exhibit and launch of the Broken Promises exhibit. We do hope you will visit us in person at the Nikkei National Museum. The exhibit opens publicly on Tuesday, the 29th of September, and will continue through to towards the end of April. I believe we put April 24th on screen, but we are still working out final dates before it moves on to Toronto. So for those of you who aren't able to see it in person, there will be online programming. And we have a digital version of our exhibit catalog, as I mentioned earlier. That actually can be downloaded as early as today. So you can either get a sneak peek at what is on display or save it for future reading as a souvenir of the exhibit. Do keep an eye on our website, nikkeiplace.org, for information about special events, programming, anything related to what is happening. Hours, we do close over the winter holidays and are not open for statutory holidays. And there are also updated safety protocols in place that we keep current. I also want to invite you to buy the book. The Landscapes of Injustice book is available in our gift shop at the museum, but also we have an online shop. So again, if you check our website and go on to the online portal, you can order your copy there. If you are visiting the Nikkei National Museum, on our second floor landing, we have displayed objects from our permanent collection. There is evidence of life in an early logging camp that Eikichi Kagetsu had, and that was through the gift of an archaeological dig led by Bob Muckle. We also have a recent donation of Masue Tagashira's son Donald's childhood school lunch kit on display on the second floor, and also a lot more interesting objects and artifacts, so do come visit. What else have I forgotten to tell you? This exhibit will travel across Canada, so we are hoping that beyond Toronto and Victoria and hopefully Halifax, that there are other city centers that will invite this exhibit to their institution. And the smaller condensed version should be available for bookings from as early as this winter. We have more information at info@nikkeiplace.org if you want to send me a quick email there. And I think I've remembered everything. I'm sorry I'm not as fluent as Jordan in memorizing, so I'm reading my notes. But
I'm just speaking off the cuff. I haven't memorized.
Any last words for our audience?
Well, it might just, certainly from my experience here, seeing the exhibit in your beautiful museum, and a lot of care is being taken around COVID, and I think you said there limited numbers would be, and so folks can come and see the exhibit here and really the beautiful job that the curators and designers have done. So I think it's worth it, and it feels very safe, even for someone from Vancouver Island, where we're very cautious about these things.
And just to that point, it is a maximum of 8 people in the exhibit at any given time. The admission at the gate is $5, and it's not time ticketed from Tuesday, but if we have 8 people already in the space, you may just have to wait a little while, but the flow should be fairly efficient.
And if you haven't gotten enough of us online, our next online event is October 22nd for the Miyajaikawa Memorial Lecture. And I'm excited to be co-presenting our book and a book by a wonderful scholar in Japan of Japanese American and Japanese Canadian history, Masumi Izumi. And the two of us will do that event October 22nd at 5 p.m. And I know that we have some viewers in Japan, and it'll be, of course, the next day in the morning there in Japan. So I'll just wrap by saying thank you, Sherri. It's been wonderful to do this work with you. And thank you to the audience for listening and for viewing, and have a wonderful afternoon.